Hey guys, welcome back to another video working on the CR250 build here. So I took a few weeks off, spent some time recovering, and now it is time to get back after it. So what I'll be doing today on this bike is building around the engine. Gonna be mounting up some electronics, the radiators, carburetor, and possibly the exhaust as well, and just a bunch of cool little bits all over the bike. So I've got some cool stuff coming your way, so stay tuned. Let's get started. I've got a bunch of parts lined up here that I want to install on the bike today. Just a matter of figuring out where to start. So I'm most excited about this Electron Carburetor. Heard some really good things about it, so I think I'm gonna start there. If any of you guys saw the Red Bull Straight Rhythm a few weeks back with only 2 strokes, you'll notice that a lot of those bikes, or at least most of the winning bikes, were running the Electron Carburetor. So really excited about that. And then I've got this red fuel line and vent hose from Niemela Concepts, kind of spruce up the carburetor here. So I'm going to mount this carburetor up first and then see how that hose looks on there. For those of you that aren't familiar with these Electron carburetors, what they do best, or what makes them so special, is they self-adjust for elevation, temperature, or changes to the bike. Alright, let's get this beauty mounted up on the bike. So once I have the bike all together and running, I'll give you guys a better idea of how exactly these carburetors work. It was a bit of a tight fit with that carburetor going into the intake boot, but definitely better having it tight than loose. At least I know 100% that's gonna seal. Check out that clear flipple though. That is gonna look so cool the first time I turn on the fuel valve. So Electron provided a throttle cable for this carburetor. So before I mount it up, I'm gonna lube it up, make sure it doesn't run dry on me. Even though this cable is brand new, always a good idea to lube it up anyways. So I'll be using a Motion Pro cable lubing tool. I believe this is called the V3 cable lubing tool. And then I'll be using Motion Pro cable lube as well. All right, that should do it. Squirted quite a bit of lube in there. And at the other end of the cable here, notice there's a film of lube, so we're good to go. Now to install the cable onto the carburetor, I'm gonna have to tilt the carburetor outward a little bit, just like that, and remove the cap. And the cable just threads right into the cap like so. Looks like the end of the cable just hooks into the slide through the hole in the middle. Gonna hold that down, pull it out, and slide the spring back into the slide. There we go. Ready to go back onto the carburetor. Now for cable routing, I always like to go in between the motor mounts here, the upper motor mounts. On my 125, I have the throttle cable and the clutch cable routed through here. Seems to work really good. Just kind of keeps the cable from getting kinked, and just a nice spot to route it through. See if it's gonna work on this bike to have that cable through there. Oh yeah, perfect. See how clean that looks? Just right through the upper motor mounts. Now before I get too carried away with mounting this carburetor, I need to make sure that throttle operates properly. Just pulling the cable, make sure it returns. Yep, that's all together perfectly. It is time to add some flavor to this carburetor with this Niemela Concepts vent hose. Just hopefully I have enough to cover. I've got one hose left and I'm just a couple inches short like always. Damn, I'm gonna have to order up some more. But anyways, I've got 3 of the hoses done. Looks like they're all around the same length. And where I like to route them is in between the frame and the linkage here, the dog bone. So there's a nice little gap here to tuck them in nice and tidy. And I've also got this piece right here. So this bolts onto the crankcase like, let's see, flip it over, just like that, and kind of holds all the hoses in tight to the crankcase. So this Niemela hose worked out perfect. Fits really good onto the fittings here on the carburetor. It's nice and flexible, not super stiff like some other brands I've used, and it looks really good. Just got to order up a little bit more and I'll be set. Now this is kind of the unsexy part of the build, but I'm going to show you guys anyways. So the electronics, there's really nothing that special about them. So the wiring harness is up first. This just provides power to everything. And what do they call this? The regulator condenser. That basically regulates the power to the ignition coil and servo motor. And this is the ignition coil that provides spark to the spark plug. CDI box pretty much controls everything. It's like the computer of the bike. And like I mentioned earlier, this is the servo motor for the power valve. Now before I get around to installing the wiring harness, got to make sure that there's seals in all of these connectors here. So you can see in these ones, there's a little orange seal down inside of there. It's really crucial to have these seals because when you wash the bike, if you don't have seals, water is going to get in those connectors and your bike is going to be cutting out if it runs at all. So it looks like we got a seal in there, and this one has a seal as well. So first things first, this is the wire coming out of the stator, and it plugs into this connector right here. And this connector has a little slot on the back side of it, and this clips onto the frame. So there's a little tab here on the frame. Let me zoom into that. So that little tab connects with the connector. Just slides on like so. You can see it's secured to the frame, and that is where the stator plugs into. And then we've got a few more connectors here. This one goes to the servo motor. This one to the regulator and condenser. These two are for the ignition coil. And then these 2 big connectors run up to the top of the frame here, or the neck of the frame, and connect to the CDI box. Oh, and we've got 2 more connectors here. These 2 go to the kill switch that's up on the handlebars. I'm just gonna tuck in the wiring harness just like that. Like I mentioned earlier, water that gets in electronics is a big deal. So it'll make your bike not run, or if it does run, it'll cut out and it'll just corrode things. And to prevent that from happening, this is what I use. It is called dielectric grease. You just put it right inside the connector. Pretty simple deal, and it prevents that connector from corroding. So you just simply put a little dab on each connector here, and then you're good to go. And these connectors should be pretty self-explanatory, but there's a little tab on this connector, little thing that pokes up, that is gonna face towards the disconnecting tab here on the connector. So you'll see there's a little thicker part, or like a little groove, where that slot or that tab goes into. Hopefully that made sense, but just be cautious of which way you're going in with the connectors. And then when you're pushing it in, you'll hear a little click. That means it's all the way in and seated. And for the stator wire, I'm just going to zip tie it to the frame, try to get it out of the way, and get it looking tidy here as well. Alright, next up we've got the ignition coil of the mount. So this upper mounting hole is also used for a ground, and so it's pretty important to have that bare steel. You don't want any rust or corrosion on that. So I'm going to take a wire brush and just make absolute sure that this thing is clean. And then for the mounting clip, I'm going to use the dielectric grease once again just to ensure that no corrosion happens down the road. So I'm going to figure out which way this coil mounts on the frame. Looks like it faces up like that. The wire pointing up. Make sure that lines up with the spark plug here. Oh yeah, looks like the right way. Plug that in to the coil. So just like I said earlier, this ground just goes on the upper mounting hole. I'm gonna dig through my bolt kit here. This is from Bolt Motorcycle Hardware. Just trying to find a few bolts for this coil. Found exactly what I was looking for. Always super nice to have fresh hardware on hand. So if you guys are looking for hardware for your bike, definitely check out Bolt Motorcycle Hardware. I believe their website is boltmx.com. For the top bolt, I am using a locking style nut, so no need to use any sort of Loctite on it. For some reason that doesn't look right. That coil wire is super kinked. It's like tight bend right here, and then at the coil as well. There's really only one way that can go on. I wasn't quite sure about the routing of the coil wire and just the mounting of the coil, so I looked up a few pictures online here, and that is indeed how the coil is mounted. So I'm just gonna leave it. I don't know, it looks weird to me, but apparently how it's supposed to be. Alright, now I've got the CDI box to mount up. But first, here is the CDI mount. So the CDI just slides on to these three little tabs here with the rubber grommet. And once I get this into place, I can just plug it in and I'll be set. And I would say the CDI connectors are probably the most important for trying to avoid water and corrosion. So you definitely want to use the grease inside the connectors. And once again, you want to make sure these connectors go all the way down and make a click when they seat all the way. Now it's time for the servo motor. This motor here controls the exhaust valve on the bike. Come over and show you guys here. This here is the exhaust valve, and this valve controls how much exhaust gas is coming out of the engine. And having this valve gives the bike a broader range of power. So before I mount this servo motor, I'm gonna have to test it. Never tested or taken one of these apart, so this will be completely new to me. Here I've got a 12-volt battery. I'm gonna hook up the battery to the connector here and see if the motor operates properly. So I'm gonna need to pull this little plastic cover off to see if the motor is turning over. It's pretty clean underneath here. It's a good sign. Here I've got two separate wires to run from the battery to the connector on the servo motor. Alright, the manual states that the positive wire coming from the battery goes to the black/white wire on the connector. This one here. And then the negative wire leads to the white/green wire. You can see when I connect the battery to the servo motor, the motor turns in a counterclockwise direction, which is what it's supposed to do. That's a really good sign. Looks like the servo motor is working properly. Now I'm gonna take it apart, which I've never done before, and just make sure everything's in good shape inside. By the way, the screwdriver that I'm using is called a JIS type screwdriver, which stands for Japanese Industrial Standard, I believe. So the screws that come on these Japanese bikes have a little different head than Phillips. So they have a little dot or a little punch mark, and that mark indicates that it's a JIS type head. And so you need to use a JIS type screwdriver for it to fit the head properly. So you can see this one fits perfectly in there and reduces your risk of stripping out the screw. So I'll put the link to where I bought these screwdrivers down below in the description box. Screws are out. Let's see how this thing splits apart. Pretty much just like an engine. You got two cases. I'm really curious about the condition of this thing inside. Just hope it's not super rusty. Wow, that's actually in really good shape. I thought it was just gonna be rusty and corroded. So from here, all I see is the motor and a couple more screws. So there's got to be some gears inside of this thing, and that's mainly what I want to look at. Got those screws out, and I believe this thing should come apart even further. It's got to be really careful. See a bunch of gears in here, and I don't want to have them all fall apart on me. I'm just going to check over these gears and shafts, make sure there's no damaged or missing teeth, grease things up, and put it back together. This side looks pretty good. Check out the motor side of it. It's actually remarkably clean in here. For a 15-year-old bike, I thought for sure I was going to run into some rust. And I'll be using this mini grease gun to squirt the grease exactly where I want it. It's got this needle-sized tip. Link to where you can buy this will be down below. So going back together, what I have to worry about is getting this half moon shape into this gear here, and then all of these posts will line up with the holes on the other half. I think it's going to be easier to have all these gears on the other half instead. So this should go back together a little easier with everything on one side. So it looks like I got that gear and the motor lined up. When I turn the pulley, you can hear inside of the motor here that it's turning. So that's a good sign, and all the rest of the gear should be lined up as well. Before I get this thing all the way back together, I'm going to test it one more time just to make sure everything is together correctly. Alright, everything checks out fine. I'm going to put the other half of the casing on, and then I can mount this servo motor on the bike. Actually, before I mount up the servo motor and the rectifier on the bike, I'm going to clean them up with the Prime MX cleaning pad here on the buffer. Oh man, these turned out sweet. Always impressed with the results of the cleaning pad. If you want to pick one of these up, they are available over on my website, primemx.com. I'll put the link down below in the description box. One last thing to do before I mount the servo motor onto the bike. I'm going to lube up the servo motor cables. Just going to squirt a little bit through this end here. It's a really short cable, so it doesn't really take much to get lube all the way through it. So I'm trying to find the correct hardware to mount the servo motor and rectifier to the bike, but this is how I got all the hardware when I bought the bike. It was already partially disassembled, so I have no clue which bolts go where. So I'm over here on RockyMountainATVMC.com, and they've got the OEM microfiche on their website, basically a parts diagram. So I've got the servo motor pulled up, and number 5 is the correct bolt used to mount the servo motor. So it looks like a 10mm head with a washer attached to it. So right there, bolt washer 6x28. So that indicates it's a 6mm thread by 28mm long. So I'm going to go ahead and find 2 bolts for that. So if you guys need a great resource on figuring out which parts go where, or you just need to order OEM or aftermarket parts, RockyMountainATVMC.com is the place to go. I found the hardware I needed. Let's get these things mounted up. Both cables attached to the power valve, I will need to set the tension on them. So I'm going to start with the back cable first. I'm going to turn the pulley on the servo motor all the way clockwise for this, and then I'm going to adjust the back cable until it starts to bow into the front cable. So watch as I turn this adjuster out or loosen the adjuster, it is going to bow into the front cable. And that's it for the back cable. To adjust the front cable, I'm going to turn the pulley on the servo motor counterclockwise all the way. And so what we're looking at here with this cable is the amount of slack here in the middle. So you can see it's moving up and down quite a bit, and so that indicates the cable is loose. I'm going to take my 8mm wrench, back this adjuster out a little bit while continually checking the slack, and I'm going to go until there's no more slack left in this cable, or just a little bit of slack. You don't want to tighten it too much. So it's very much like a clutch cable adjustment. Got a little bit of play there. Gonna go maybe 2 more turns. No, that's a little tight. So there's just a tiny bit of play there, and I'm gonna call that good. And then down here at the bottom, I am going to lock the top nut against the cylinder to secure the cable into place. Cover it all up and we are set. Just got to bolt the power valve covers back on and I'll be all finished up with the electronics.